tonight I did have, oops, I got to step down here. Tonight I do have a presentation here that I'd like to run through, and I want to talk to you about, after that introductory remarks, about the Buddha himself. So what this is all about is the Buddha, it's not a name, it's an epithet. It means, actually, it's the awakened one, but literally it's the one who woke up. That's kind of a better translation of it. But it means the awakened one. And it talks about, and it's this idea, it's an epithet, so it's not a name. We know that the person whom we refer to as the Buddha was a prince, right? In the area that is now present-day Nepal, right around in that area. His name was Siddhartha. Herman Hesse wrote a book in the 1970s under that title that talked about his life. And he was a prince. He was raised in great opulence, and he was protected from all the suffering that goes on in the world. But when he was 30, he decided that he had enough, that he had to venture outside the palace walls and see what was really going on. And what was really going on was suffering. He saw it all over, and he wondered, what is this all about? What's causing this suffering? Why are people suffering so much? And for a while, he became a wandering mendicant. Actually, for the rest of this 40 years, of the last 40 years of his life, he was a wandering mendicant. And that just means, in India even today, some older gentlemen, after they've retired, decide to go out to preach, so to speak, to talk about the truths, the Buddhist truths. And that still goes on a great deal in India, and this is what he did. Usually it's much later in life that they do that, but he decided this was what he was going to do. He was going to wander around and search for truth, and boy, he found truth in suffering. So that's a major idea about Buddhism. It's suffering. That's pretty much the central idea of what Buddhism, is all about. I'll just leave those up there. So that is the central idea of Buddhism. It's based upon suffering. And in a little while we'll talk about the Four Noble Truths and how that all ties into the idea of suffering. But the central idea, if anyone comes up to you in an elevator and says, oh, we're only going one floor, what's Buddhism all about? It's about suffering. It's about suffering, the reality, the truth of suffering. And so for a while, he wandered around with these people who were suffering. They were hermits, and they would wear very little clothes, and they would eat bugs and things like that, and abuse their bodies because they thought that these bodies were to be abused, that they were filthy. And he decided, that's not me. You ever see the Buddha? He's got a big smile on his face. He said, no, life is to be enjoyed. You guys are willingly engaging in suffering, and that's a major root problem right there. So he wanders into this town called Bodh Gaya, and he decides he's going to sit at the base of a Bodhi tree, and he said that I am going to meditate here until I understand the nature of reality. And so he sat there all night, and in the morning he woke up, and he created what is known as the first sutra, known as the the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. That sounds like a football cheer or something. Yeah, kick them in the groin or whatever. Dhammacakka. Anyway, but what it really means is the first turning, the first great turning of the wheel of truth. So what he was doing was searching for truth, and he created this Bodhikari, I keep getting these two confused, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. And so he created this, and it is his first sutra. Now in Buddhist theory, the idea of a sutra is something that the Buddha talked about and that he wrote about or he approved in his presence. And so theoretically or technically, when the Buddha passed on, there would be no more sutras. We're going to see an exception to that rule in a little while. But that's what sutra, it means a thread, right? So it's a discussion, it's a discourse, so to speak. So that's what a sutra is all about. And in Buddhist terms, it's about something that the Buddha fully supported. And so let's talk about some fundamental ideas of Buddhism, shall we? Oops, there we go. the three fundamental ideas of Buddhism. There's three fundamental ideas. These are the foundational values of Buddhism. And one, of course, is this idea about impermanence. That's the first one. This idea of impermanence. Nothing is permanent. Everything changes. There is nothing. We are fooling ourselves if we think we have any substance, that what we're really all about is change, that the universe is all about change. And in this document, he talks about different kinds of changes. There's subtle change, so think of the Grand Canyon, things that change gradually over time, millions and millions of years. But there's also, that's continuous change. There's this idea about subtle change, which is us, you and me. Do you realize you have changed significantly since you came in here? Our body is always changing. It's changing right now. Mitosis and cytokinesis. Cells are dying off and multiplying, splitting, multiplying, getting bigger, and that sort of thing. And we're changing constantly. When we hugged a couple of people here today. You're different because of that hug. We have absorbed, molecules or atoms from each other, and so we are continually changing. I always use this story about the car, that your car is exactly where you're expecting it tonight, but when you go back to it, it will have been moved millions of miles. Why? Because the natural order of the universe has changed. We're spinning around, and we're spinning around the sun and spinning as we do it, and the sun is moving away from the Milky Way. It's just one arm of the Milky Way, and that's rotating at millions of miles an hour, and the Milky Way is going through the universe, and it's moving towards something called the Great Attractor. So all in all, your car has moved millions of miles, but in that time, so have you. So we don't know it, and that's what led Einstein to talk about relativity, that it's all relative. And in this case, we're talking about impermanence. We live, we get old, we're born as babies, we get old, we get bigger, we age, we pass away. Buddhism came into light in the backdrop of Hinduism. And Hinduism believed a great deal about the transmigration of souls, that people, frogs, whatever, all these creatures go, that's what the nature of life is, the transmigration of souls. That in this lifetime you may be a person, in the next one you may be a pig. Sometimes those are two, you do them both at the same time. Anyway, so this idea about permanence here, that we go through these cycles, that's one of the foundational ideas about Buddhism. So if we're talking about Buddhism, think about what's down here, the foundation, this idea about impermanence. Everything changes. The next idea is... and that's the nature of reality. That is the nature of reality, the idea that we are changing continually, that the universe is continually changing. That's what reality is. Reality is not stationary. We are not something that has some sort of essence apart from reality. That the natural order of the universe is change. Everything changes. And the second major idea, so we've got this idea here about things are always changing. And the next one is this idea about selflessness. Look, we suffer and we engage in ignorance if we believe that we have any kind of essence in and of ourselves. Because we don't. There's nothing constant. We think of the Tao. The Tao talks that names can be names, but they are not real names. In other words, you can give something a name, but it doesn't describe what that thing is. It's only to you. And so you are using something called conceptual imputation and just making that kind of thing up if we think that anything has any essence, because it doesn't. So we've got these three foundational areas, and I've only talked about one of them now, the idea about impermanence, that things are constantly changing, the idea about selflessness, we have no essence in and of ourselves because we are constantly changing entities just like the universe is. And then we come to the third foundational idea, and I skipped it. It's the idea of interdependence, that everything is interdependence, and it's interdependent in a couple of ways. The Buddhists have this thing called the Doctrine of Dependent Origination. What it really means is everything's cause and effect. You are here today because some many, many years ago, your parents had you as a little child, and then all of those things, but had that not happened, you wouldn't be here today. You discovered, you know, everything that you have done, everything you have ever done, ever will do, you know, it's just, it's cause and effect. You're only able to do it because something happened in the back. That's where they say dependent of origination. Everything that has ever happened is some result of some cause that happened prior to that. That's a very key point. This idea about dependent origination, everything has cause and effect. So another part of this idea about interdependence is part-whole dependence. You know, we are, when you're talking to someone, maybe you meet someone at a party, you might say, oh, what do you do for a living? You know, well, I'm a teacher, or I'm a housewife, or I'm a truck driver, or whatever it is. You know, we identify as being part of that group of people. Oh, I go to CSL Simi Valley. You recognize that you are a part of a spiritual organization. So, and I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I'm a cousin, I'm a brother, I'm a sister, I'm a whatever it is, I'm a child. That is a relationship to something else. So we get that. That's part of this whole idea about part-whole dependence, so cause and effect, and this idea about part-whole dependence. Think of it this way. A steering wheel of an automobile is pretty useless unless you got a car to go with it. You need a car to make a steering wheel have any, and outside of a car, a steering wheel has basically no use whatsoever, right? So it gets its identity from its belonging to this whole part. And that's what we mean about when we talk about this idea about interdependence. We are all come together. We are all connected in this fabric that we call life. So the three major ideas about Buddhism, don't forget, is this idea about impermanence, things are always changing. The idea about selflessness, we have no essence outside, there is no essence at all. We suffer if we think that there is, and this whole idea about interdependence, that we are all linked in these various ways, cause and effect, and part-whole dependence. So that's that's basically the three fundamental ideas, the foundational ideas of Buddhism. Those three areas, interdependence, selflessness, and impermanence. So let's take a look at what the Buddha actually talked about. Those are the three foundational ideas, but let's talk about what he talked about. He talked about noble truth. Remember when we talked about what the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra was all about, and this is a great idea that he came up with out of that. And it's about the idea of noble truths. Remember when I said that Siddhartha went out from his palace in what is now Nepal and started seeing all of this suffering? So it's the truth. So the first noble truth is the truth of suffering. Suffering exists. Boy, you turn on the news right now, how much suffering have you seen with the people in Ukraine, as an example? There's suffering in the world, and you don't have to look very far to find it. There's always suffering in all times. It is the reality of the world. The world is suffering right now. But what is the cause of that suffering? The second noble truth talks to us about what is the cause of that suffering. And the cause is, there's a couple of causes. One is ignorance. Ignorance, when you fail to understand that the reality, the ultimate nature of reality is these three fundamental truths here. The idea about selflessness, interdependence, impermanence, those three things. That's the source. If you can't accept that, it's causing you suffering. And the other part of the source of suffering is this idea about wanting things that you can't have. I want $25 million in my bank account right now. And, well, most likely that's just not going to happen, right? But if I want it so badly, whatever it is, and I can't have it, then I start suffering because of that, right? So it's this idea about wanting things that you can't have, and also wanting to get rid of things that you do have, like your kids, or I don't know, something. No, let's hope that isn't the truth. So wanting to get rid of something that you do. People, suffer a great deal of anxiety about trying to lose weight, as an example. So, or lose their craving for cigarettes or things like that. And that all suffers. That all causes suffering. So that, what they identify as the second noble truth, is this idea about what is the source of suffering. Well, it's ignorance and not recognizing those three things, and it's wanting things that you can't have and wanting to get rid of things that you have and you don't want. That is the second noble truth. That's the idea about suffering. The third noble truth is the idea about the end of suffering. How do we end suffering? Well, just back up a bit. We stop being ignorant. We stop failing to recognize impermanence and selflessness and interdependence. We fail to recognize that. We can stop doing that. And we can stop craving attachment. That's the thing. We can stop craving for things that we just can't have, It's fine to want things, but if the wanting destroys your life, it makes you so miserable, and I've known people like that, then that's the source of that's unhappiness. So stop it. Don't do that kind of stuff anymore. That's what the third noble truth is all about. And the fourth noble truth is about the end of suffering, the path of the Bodhisattva, the eightfold path of the Bodhisattva. And that gets a lot more complex when we talk about what that's all about and how does that all work. But it's basically the eightfold path, and what the Buddhists talk about is moral domains, moral domains. And let's talk about some of the domains. This is the eightfold path. So I do want to turn around. Forgive me turning my back on you. It isn't my best side, but nonetheless, it's the side that most people want to see, I think. So anyway, so there's these three domains, and the domains are action, thought, and mindfulness. So under action, there's right action. So do the right thing, and you know what the right thing is, right? The right thing is not gossiping about your neighbor or whatever it is that you're up to. And you know what the right action is. Just do the right action. Don't do the wrong action. Stealing from the grocery store is probably not the right action, And right livelihood. Look, if you're employed by breaking people's kneecaps who have failed to pay their bills to certain types of folks, that's not a right livelihood. A right livelihood, is something that serves the course of humanity, that gets us outside of ourselves and creates something beautiful for the rest of the world. If you're doing something like that, I think of ministers, doctors, policemen, a lot of different areas, they're doing that is the right livelihood, because it's a livelihood that is serving humanity, as opposed to someone else who is a crook and is just trying to rip people off. That is not the right livelihood. And then the right speech. Say the right speech. I think one of the worst examples of this is if you go on Facebook. People are really nasty and cruel to each other, and they say terrible things. So there are things, I've said terrible things about people. A lot of them I've talked about myself, how terrible I am. We have a tendency to do that, to beat ourselves up, Oh, geez, I didn't get that done or whatever, Stop all that. Stop being your worst enemy. Be your friend, and be a friend to all others by thinking about what I'm about to say. Is it necessary? Is it true? And is it kind? And if it fulfills those requirements, it's worth talking about according to the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. Gary, say that 6 times real quick while holding your tongue. So it won't work. So, and then there's the idea about thought. the idea about thought, the right view. You've got to have the right perspective on our perspectives, our paradigms drive everything that we do. When we look at the world through these lenses, consider politics. I know it's not a pleasant thing to even think about, but think about politics. The idea we see some politician of whatever party, and you got two people sitting there, and one says, this person is just amazing. Oh, I got to vote for this person. And the other one is, are you out of your mind? This is a bozo, or whatever it is. You know, you have your own perspective. Because why? Because we look through the world from this lens, and that's what it's a paradigm, so to speak. And then the right intention. What is your right intention? You know, some people can do great things without the right intention. There are plenty of people who do things for charity, etc., and then they immediately let everybody know, hey, guess what I did over here? Aren't I cool? Because I helped these orphans or whatever it is, you know. So is that the right intention? Were you helping the orphans to actually lift these people out of poverty? Or was it so you could claim on Facebook to all your friends that you're such a wonderful person? So, and then the right effort. Take the right effort. Do the right thing. You know, try to do the right thing, and for the right reasons. That's really what that's talking about. And then mindfulness. Anybody hear of a guy named Dennis Merritt Jones? Anybody? You know, that was, I think, a central point of his whole ministry, was the idea of mindfulness, because it's so important, and right concentration, you know, concentrating on the right things. Years ago, I was running a company, and a multi-billion-dollar company, and I was making a significant change in my life, and at that time, this is what I was concentrating on. Oh my God, I hope I don't lose my job. I hope I don't lose my job. I hope I don't lose my job. And guess what? I lost my job. So no surprise. Why? Because I was concentrating on the problem rather than concentrating on the solution. And that's never helpful. That's never helpful. And the Buddhists know that. I have lost my clicker. Did I? Thank you. Now if I could just find my posterior. It's there somewhere. So right concentration. You see, I wasn't concentrating, and this thing got away from me. Let's talk. So we've talked a little bit about the foundation, the three foundational beliefs of what this is all about: interdependence, selflessness, and impermanence. And we talked about the Four Noble Truths and what that's all about, and it's all wrapped around suffering, right? And then, but let's talk a little bit about the history. Did you know? So Buddhism came into being around 500 BC. You know what else going on across another part of the world there? We had Greek philosophy, and the Homeric legends had been created some 300-400 years before that. So that just gives you a perspective about what was going on in the world. So around 500 BC, the Buddha had this, you know, the Bodhichitta or the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra came out. And from the first 500 years, it was very cloistered. The Buddhists kept the stuff to themselves. They were seeking enlightenment for themselves, and the people who were practicing Buddhism were part of this organization. They were monks, so to speak, and they were, you know, cared for by people and fed and that sort of thing. But their teaching was basically, if you wanted to be a Buddhist, you had to be a monk. You had to come and join us and live our lifestyle and that sort of thing. That went on for like 500 years. But something changed around the beginning of the millennium, the first millennium. So right at about the time Christianity was coming into being, we got this idea about Mahayana Buddhism coming into being. And I'll tell you a little. Mahayana means the great vehicle. So it changed. Something amazing happened right at the beginning of the first millennium. Buddhism changed from being this deep philosophical thought that was shared by these educated monks and nuns as well, monks and nuns who were studying this, and it became a missionary teaching. In other words, people started looking around for to become enlightened for the benefit of other sentient beings. And that was completely absent in the first 500 years of Buddhism. It really was, and it changed. So it started around here in India, northern India, and it spread, it eventually would spread to China, and where it would become something known as Chan Buddhism, which would then be exported to Korea and Japan, which would become Zen Buddhism, and I may or may not do a talk in a couple of weeks about Zen Buddhism, but you guys may be burned out on Buddhism after this talk, who knows. So, but as it changed, it moved up into China, let's say this, when it moved into Tibet. Now, Tibet did not have a strong culture. They didn't. It was a bunch of tribes, loosely held tribes. And so when Buddhism went into Tibet, it went into Tibet in almost its pure form. But when it moved into China, something different happened. What happened in China is it was informed by things like Taoism, and Confucianism. China had some very strong traditions, and so when Buddhism was introduced, those Chinese traditions modified China, and which led to the Chan, the idea about Chan Buddhism, which was then led to Zen in Korea and in Japan. So that's kind of how things were changing, how things were moving around. It started here in this area in India, and then it spread to Sumatra, Java, China, Korea, Japan, Afghanistan, and eventually to the whole world. But it changed significantly when it went into China. And let me tell you about Sutras and Sea Serpents. You want a story about Sutras and Sea Serpents? This idea, remember when I said sutras can only be, it was only something that the Buddha had approved, that had been discussed with the Buddha, or that the Buddha wrote or authored in some ways, and that technically when the Buddha died, there would be no more sutras. Well, in about the turn of the century, suddenly there started appearing these things called the Mahayana Sutras. The Mahayana Sutras, Mahayana means the great vehicle, and it was this whole idea about the change in Buddhism. It was embracing this change where people were becoming, more enlightened for the benefit of other sentient beings as opposed for their own enlightenment. And so it changed, and what the real story is, that probably in the 1st or 2nd century there were a bunch of monks that created this idea about the Mahayana Sutra. But and since sutras technically had to be something that the Buddha embraced, what they did was they said, well, actually the Buddha did embrace this, but it was such a strong, powerful message that he couldn't take the chance of it falling into anybody's hands. So what did he do? He did exactly what I do when I'm trying to hide something. I turn it over to sea serpents, and they hold it for me at the bottom of the ocean, right, for 500 years. Parchment doesn't corrode, actually. But that was the message that they gave out, was that, yeah, it really happened during the Buddha, but they were hidden down, and then these sea serpents took them, brought them down to the ocean, and they were instructed to bring them back at this certain time and give them to this guy, Narjuna. And so that's the story, that how they justified calling the Mahayana Sutras sutras, when in reality I'm having a hard time buying the whole sea serpent story. But that's the story that animates this. The great vehicle, the idea about Mahayana Buddhism was the idea about the second turning. The first turning was the creation of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, when the Buddha was in the town of Bodhi, or under the Bodhi tree. And that was the first turning of the wheel, and the Mahayana Sutras are known as the second turning of the wheel. In a little while, we're going to take a look at what that wheel is, and it's pretty fascinating. I don't know, maybe not, but I think so. There's two ideas. I left out. I seem to have left something out. Let's talk about it. There are two great ideas, and that come out of something called the Bodhicaryavatara, which means, which is a document that came out of this 8th century Buddhist. He was a brilliant guy, but everyone thought he was a little weird, and they made fun of him. He was teaching at the largest university in the world in India at that time, and he was one of the faculty, and they kind of, you know, he was the butt of many, many jokes. And they said to him, look, we're having this as a lark, you know, as a joke. Let's play on him, this idea about, we're having a big conference, and we'd like you to come and do a talk for us. And he said, you want something old or something new? And they, let's do something new, because they were hoping he would embarrass himself. So the time of the conference came, he shows up, he starts talking about this stuff, and when he's done with it, he makes a spectacular exit. He floats up, he levitates, apparently, according to the stories, and he floats over to the window, and he bids everyone a farewell. He goes out the window and disappears into the sky and was never seen again. So they went to his quarters, and they found 2 copies of this Bodhicaryavatara, and one's a little longer than the other, but they're basically the same thing. There's some changes in the larger one. And there were 2 ideas that came out of it. The first is emptiness. Now, this is something we're already familiar with. We talk about selflessness. The idea is we suffer when we think that we have any kind of essence of ourselves. We are essenceless. We are nothing more than constantly changing phenomena. That's what this guy was talking about. That was one of the major truths in this. And the other was this idea about the second great idea was the idea of the Bodhisattva. This person who actually takes this eightfold path, but does it not for their own enlightenment, but for the enlightenment of someone else. So the idea about essenceless, you know, if you want to ease your suffering, recognize that you are without essence, and this other idea about the Bodhisattva, which is a person trying to become enlightenment for the benefit of other folks. So here's a guy, Shanti Deva and the Awakened Life. This was something else here. He talked about bodhicitta and karuna. So bodhicitta, what is bodhicitta? Bodhicitta is this idea about compassion, a commitment to do something. But there's aspirational bodhicitta, which happens at the beginning. You know, I've just got this urge, I've got to do this stuff. But until you go through all the eightfold path and do all that stuff, you don't yet achieve full bodhicitta, which is this idea about of a commitment that is actually working, that you're living the idea of the Buddha and you are committed to bringing that to the world. The other idea is karuna, which loosely means kind of compassion, you know. So it's engagement, engaged compassion. Unengaged compassion is stupid. So as an example, you have compassion for people, you go to Africa, and you find that there's this village along the river, and a lot of people are blind from it. They get a condition called river blindness. And you, in your compassion, you want to I'll stay here and I'll help these folks. And before long, you're drinking the same river and you get blindness, you know, so you become part of the problem. So karuna is more like intelligent compassion. Maybe the right step is to go back to the States, do a fundraiser to get some money, to get them purified water, to buy all the equipment and stuff, and then go back and help. That's karuna. Staying there and becoming part of the problem is not karuna, and it is not consistent with the Buddhists. See, Buddhists are really about engaging with life. And the 6 perfections. There are 6 perfections that he talked about. Gratitude, propriety, presence, effort, meditate, or mindfulness, and wisdom. So these 6 things, these are what you should be perfecting if you hope to lead an awakened life. I'm not sure if you guys are up for this, but if you are, could we talk a little bit about this wheel? It's supposed to be circular, but it was really difficult to see. And so I thought I'd spend just a few minutes, because if you ever go to a Buddhist temple, you're going to see one of these or some variation of it, but very similar to this thing. And it really captures the whole idea about what Buddhism is all about. As an example, it is this wheel. And again, it's really round, but I had to help, kind of bring it out so maybe it's a little more visible. What is at the very center? We've got a pig, a rooster, and a snake. What animates this whole wheel, what gets this thing turning, is this idea about suffering, the causes of suffering, the idea about ignorance, failing to recognize those three foundational beliefs, and wanting things we can't have we can't have them. So, and wanting to get rid of things that we don't like. And so that's what animates life, really. And when you get around it here a little bit, there's the idea about the cycles that we go through of birth, life, and death over and over and over. Buddhism came into being against the backdrop of Hinduism, and this idea about the transmigration of souls came right from the Hindus. So they borrowed it, and it means there's changing. You see a person getting old and dying and going to hell and dying and coming back, etc., etc. Now there's these areas, these domains, or these worlds around here. And I'll tell you a little bit, just a couple brief about the worlds. The top one up here in the center is, and I know you can't see this, but it's the world of gods. In Buddhism, even the gods are impermanent. They're going to die as well. And in this image, we've got all these deities, these gods that are there, and the Buddha is there playing a lute. And so he's there to remind them that, hey guys, you're impermanent too. The reality of everything of the universe is things that are impermanent. So don't be too complacent, gods, because your time is coming as well. And over here, there's the Titans, the world of the Titans. These are fighters. They're always fighting. Now, I find it strange. Remember when Buddhism came into being? We talk about the idea of the Titans. In about 300 or 400 years before that, the Greeks created these myths about the Titans versus and their wars with the Olympians, right? So the Titans against the quote-unquote the established gods. And this is the same thing, the Titans attacking the gods, and the Buddha is holding a sword. They're attacking the gods. Why? Because they have their own desires that are driving them, and they think they're jealous of the gods, so the gods are more elevated than we are, so we're going to put an end to that. And in this case, the Buddha is carrying a sword. Over here is the idea of men. Men create organizations, they create governments. Human beings create governments and structures and all of that, and those are just testaments to egotism and to greed and all of those sorts of things. So it causes suffering again because they want things to achieve in these empires that they created, and they can't, so that causes suffering. And the Buddha shows up with a begging bowl. Remember, the Buddha is in all of these. He's showing up in all of these areas. Over here, we have the world of hunger. And these are really emotional states. These are what you and I go through all the time. And this representation here show these creatures with tiny little throats, but big bellies. So they have big appetites, but no way to satiate those appetites. And then that causes suffering, right? And here the Buddha has, I forgot, and I can't, he has a book. He's going to show them a book, I guess. So, and then there's down here hell. Hell is not forever. In Buddhist, in Christianity, you go to hell, you're there forever and ever suffering. But in this case, hell is hot and cold, and it is things you don't like, but it's temporary. It's going to end, and that's a reminder. Look, if there's something going on in your life that is really bad right now, it's temporary. It will be over, one way or the other. It will be over. So it's temporary, and the Buddha is reminding us of that. And then there's the world of animals. Boy, we haven't been, the things we do to animals, right? We ride them, we eat them, we domesticate them. We love animals, some types of animals, the cute ones anyway, but we have really taken advantage of animals. And this is an idea, emotional state, the animal that's in you. You are an animal, especially Gary. He's an animal. So it's this idea about about having anger. We react angrily. Someone does something to us, we react like animals, fight or flight, you know. So and in the case, and then don't forget, the Buddha is in all of these areas, which means that gives us hope for whatever state we find ourselves in, whatever emotional state we find ourselves in this world. The Buddha is there with some sort of answer for it. That's what this is represent. And then this goes through the various stages of life here, these icons on the... We got a blind guy. We spend much of our life being blind, wandering. I know for me, I've done that all kinds of times. Just wandering life, not knowing what the hell I'm doing, but faking it, you know. And so we are blind in life. There's this idea about the potter's wheel. What wheel are you making of your life? What are you doing? What did you do today? What are you going to do tomorrow to make to forge your life, so to speak? And that's all it's saying, is we're responsible for making our own lives. And there's an idea about form and names. This is a recognition of the truth that was in the Tao about names are not true names. They're only given names. So they say, I love this idea about the what you say reflects more about you than it does about whatever it is you're commenting on. The world is not as the world is as we are, according to our... And so this goes around and talks about the various stages, about, you know, a man and a woman meeting together, there's about to have a baby, they have a baby, the baby eventually grows up into an older person, et cetera, and you know what happens. So it's just that wheel. Up here we have the Buddha over there, and here we have the Bodhisattva of compassion over there, a metaphorical figure about someone who has actually achieved enlightenment but is not the Buddha. And this is a very important point. You see that red guy up there with the three eyes and the sharp, ugly teeth? That is death. And the truth is that death holds us in its grasp, each and every one of us. We could be taken at any moment. I may not be able to finish this talk. Some of you would be grateful for that. But nonetheless, so this idea about if we're held in the jaws of death, and we fear death, but we want to put it out of our mind. We know okay, it's inevitable, yeah, but we just push it out of our mind and we don't think about it. Because why? Because of fear. And why would we be fearful? Well, if we don't accept those fundamental truths about things being impermanent, as an example, in this case. When we realize things are impermanent, we can put an end to our own suffering. So that's basically what that's all about. And we're nearly done. This is another picture, meaningful life and the fear of death. So that's the whole idea. If we can put this fear of death out of our mind, then we can have a meaningful life. And the meaningful life is in service to other sentient beings, because we become enlightened, and therefore we have the tools and the resources necessary to enlighten the rest of the world. So that's what that's all about. That's an idea about, and the virtue, again, the concern for other peoples. That's the primary fundamental Buddhist virtue. And let's just, we've got a couple minutes to go over a couple of things. So Kill the Buddha, remember we talked about this book from 1970s, early 1970s by Sheldon Kopp, and it was this idea, don't set up Buddhas, don't set up, you know, even a spiritual mind, a religious science or science of mind minister, you know, yes, we can learn from a person who's very, you know, has studied a lot, but we can't set them up as a god. We cannot turn our power over to anyone, because once you do that, you're setting yourself up for disappointment and for a great deal of pain. So the Four Noble Truths, that's all about suffering, this cause of suffering. the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path to the end of the suffering, the Eightfold Path of the Bodhisattva. So that was the Four Noble Truths about Buddhism. The foundational ideas right here about impermanence, selflessness, and interdependence, that is just at the very bottom. That's kind of the flooring of this whole idea about teaching, the Buddhist teaching. And a meaningful life of the Bodhisattva. We're always searching for life, for meaning. Well, the Shantideva and some of those other philosophers talk to us about this idea about finding meaning in helping other people, that you find meaning in a good life that is based upon concern for others. And the path and the six perfections. So we talked about the Eightfold Path of the Bodhisattva and the six perfections of gratitude, patience, permanence, wisdom, effort, and wisdom, mindfulness, and wisdom was the last one. So the path of the Eightfold Path and the six perfections is how we become enlightened. And then engaging with humanity, we talked about the idea about Bodhichitta, which is this commitment to become an enlightened being. And at first it's aspirational Bodhichitta, but once we use these other paths, the Eightfold Path and the six perfections, then we become fully engaged Bodhichitta. And Karuna, which is compassion, and it is smart compassion. We use that metaphor about river blindness. So that's pretty much that's like the Reader's Digest version of what Buddhism is all about. I hope that this was informative, and perhaps, who knows, it might plant some seeds that you may want to go take a closer look at it. I am honored, pleased, and so happy that you're here tonight. Thank each and every one of you. God bless you. Thank you for coming. I'm so grateful. And I want to give a special shout out to Greg Seymour back there again, who tirelessly works on trying to get all of this technical stuff together. So I almost fell off the stage. There's probably a sign to shut up. So that's what I'm going to do right now, and I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you, Paulette. As always, quite informative. So, one thing I have learned, though, there's another way to look at gurus. The actual word guru, G-U-R-U. I can't remember where I heard that, but that's how I look at it now. Go for it, because I have no idea who I stole it from. Yeah. Yeah. So, let's come together once again, and with the appreciation of an evening filled with the idea of another type of spirituality, another way of living your life. We take those ideas and remember the truth about what we believe ourselves. When we adjust accordingly, what works for us and what doesn't. We release, we absorb, we affirm, and we know the truth, the ultimate truth. God is all there is. No matter what name you use, the power and presence of God dwells within each and every one of us. And as we become more and more mindful or aware of this truth, we act from it, we live from it. So let's go home contemplating this idea, living from it, learning from it, and knowing that we have this community that totally supports us in whatever path we take. So with great gratitude for Paulette, great gratitude for Gregory, and for each and every one of you here, and if there was a live stream, for everyone there, we know with absolute truth that love prevails, and together we say, and so it is.
Right.